morning, Instagram. And good morning, Facebook. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Friday. Let me change the lighting in here so you guys aren't getting blinded. That's better. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. I am your host, Mitch Babcock, lead faculty in the Fitness Athlete Division, where you can catch us online for the Essential Foundations cohorts, the Advanced Concepts cohorts, as well as on the road, which I will be later today, catching a flight to New York for the Fitness Athlete Live course out in Wappinger Falls, New York. I hope I got that right. I hope that was not pronounced like a Michigander would. Going to New York, flying into Albany, driving a little bit south and hanging out for the weekend with some good folks out there, and excited to rock that cohort. It's going to be a good time out in New York. So you can catch us on the live courses. Speaking of live courses, you know that I've got to make you guys aware of what is coming so that you don't miss out on a good time coming near you. And speaking of a good time, the Modern Management of the Older Adult course coming to Evans, Georgia. That's next weekend, Saturday and Sunday, August 21st and 2nd. Go hang out with Dustin, hopefully Christina, I think, and the rest of the Modern Management of the Older Adult crew. Speaking of that same weekend, August 21st and 2nd, we've got Justin Dunaway down in Hendersonville, Tennessee, one of my favorite places to go visit, the Morgans and the great crew down in Hendersonville. Justin will be teaching the total spine thrust course next weekend down there. If you want some sharpening of your skill set when it comes to cracking the bones of the spine, you need to go hang with Justin down there for the total spine thrust manipulation course. And then speaking of the spine, the lumbar spine management course the weekend following. So that's 2 weekends from now, August 28th. You can catch that course down in Georgia as well, down in Kingsland. We've got a ton of Fitness Athlete Live courses on the books this fall. Speaking of like the next 6 to 8 weeks, and we're going to be traveling a lot. I just booked a flight out to Alaska. Just shout out to the folks that are going to be in Anchorage with us up in Alaska. It's going to be a good time up there. We've got courses in Denver. We've got courses in Texas, in Atlanta. You can catch us in a lot of different places. So if you're looking to grab the Fitness Athlete Live course, jump onto the books and find one that's in your town, in your area, and come hang with us for the weekend. Okay, let's talk about the show today. And the title of today's show is about powerful hip flexion. And I just realized that I titled it wrong on Facebook. I wrote extension because my brain literally goes to powerful hip extension. Doesn't everyone's brain, when we're talking about, athletic performance, when we're talking about Olympic lifting, everything is focused around hip extension, right? And we fail to realize that powerful hip flexion is a very vital component to both athletic endeavors, but also Olympic lifting. And that's specifically the world that I work in with the CrossFit side of things, teaching courses on the weekends, helping folks become better movers, better athletes under the barbell. It's the hip flexion component that I see a lot of folks really struggle with. They've spent so much time trying to open their hip up, get their hip open, right, into extension, and then the bar is drifting up in the air, and they are very slow to pull themselves under it. They lack the ability to create powerful hip flexion. Think about in sports, there are a lot of things that powerful hip flexion, there is a reason all of them muscle bundles live in the anterior part of the hip to help us create that powerful hip flexion, the psoas, the iliacus, right? That bundle in the anterior hip flexor region, part of the rectus femoris, right? There's a reason there's so many muscles that live in that anterior hip compartment to create forceful movement like sprinting, right? Pulling that knee forward before we drive that foot into the ground. That connection of hip flexion to hip extension is important in our athletic endeavors. And then in Olympic weightlifting, it's the reason that the best that you see are so quick to get under the bar. Gravity isn't working faster for them, folks. It's not pulling them under the bar faster. They are pulling themselves under the bar. They're pulling themselves under the bar with velocity and with speed by moving their body on an anchor point, which is the bar in space. And they're doing that with very powerful hip flexion. So I say all this to say, if your Olympic lifts struggle, if you struggle getting under the bar, if you're pulling the bar very high, you can generate really good hip extension power on it, but you struggle to get under the bar, it's time to evaluate your ability to create powerful hip flexion. And then how do we train that? What are some drills that we can go with? The first thing, obviously, is looking at technique-wise. I don't like to see athletes really off the ground too long in their Olympic lifts. We often use the cue jump when we're training beginner and novice athletes how to create triple extension. We just want to be thinking about jumping hard with a bar in our hand. But we don't want to see athletes jump high, because when you jump high, you are unplugged from the floor and you lose your ability to create powerful hip flexion. You lose the ability to pull yourself under the bar. You're waiting in the air until your feet make contact with the ground again, and then you can begin to move yourself under the bar. And that is a slow process. So if you are Olympic lifting and you find yourself doing the Michael Jordan hang time thing, you're up in the air a long time in your snatches and your cleans, try to work on staying grounded more. Use the cue jump hard, not high, right? Try to jump hard through the floor, but not trying to create as much height off the floor as you can. Once you've done that, once you've limited how much vertical displacement your feet are coming off the floor, then we can begin to train getting under the bar faster. And one of the most common ways that we do that from an Olympic lifting standpoint still is with the snatch balance and the drop snatch. Very similar but slightly different movements. The snatch balance, the bar is on the back. When your snatch grip, you're going to dip, drive into triple extension, and then quickly pull yourself under inflection, right? So the bar's on the back, dip, drive, and then quickly under the bar into hip flexion. And the goal with the snatch balance is ideally to pull yourself down into the bottom of the squat, right? To pull yourself into as much hip flexion as you can, as rapidly as you can, right? So snatch balance is going to be one of the first drills that help us understand how quickly we have to turn around from hip extension to hip flexion. I've got to open my hip and close my hip equally as fast. Don't get stuck in just opening your hip and then just hanging out up there. Open your hip violently and then pull yourself under aggressively under the bar. Snatch balance can really help with that. The next one that gets a little bit harder is the drop snatch. Set up the same way as the snatch balance. The bar is on the back, but this time you don't get a dip and a drive. You just drop. You start at full extension. I will sometimes start up on my tippy toes, and then I am simply dropping and punching under the bar. A drop snatch is tough. You have to keep the weight light here because you don't get that heaving momentum to be able to bounce it off the shoulder. You just simply drop and punch under the bar. And if you're not quick enough, you're going to find yourself pressing your drop snatches a lot. Drop snatches at a light weight really encourage you to be fast, to drop and support under the bar rather than pressing yourself under the bar, right? So using a drop snatch at a light weight where you don't get any hip extension, no dip and no drive, you just simply drop under the bar. What other drills could we use to train athletes into creating more powerful hip flexion if that's something that we struggle with? Slam balls is one that gets forgotten in the CrossFit training methodology a lot, and it's a fantastic movement for training powerful closure of the hip, right? Slam ball is getting the ball up into full flexion, and then you're pulling down and slamming the ball down to the ground with power and velocity, right? You don't want to be thinking about slam balls as done for time. You want slam balls to be done for power production, right? Each time you come, you're trying to literally drive the ball through the floor as hard as you can, and that's going to help train both the anterior chain but the hip flexors a lot to pull yourself down into hip flexion as you pull the slam ball down to the earth, right? So if your gym has some slam balls like my gym does and they're all dusty and hanging out in the top rack of the shelf in the corner because they never get used very often, that is a good thing to dust off and to break out some powerful hip flexion movements with slam balls, right? We're training hip extension a lot, but let's also make sure that we're training hip flexion. And then the other one that's really useful that athletes are doing a lot of and maybe not being mindful that is helping work on their hip flexion is GHD sit-ups. GHD sit-ups, when we elongate that trunk, when we lay all the way on back and then we fire the quads and we're using those hip flexors to help us sit back upright, can really help train speed and velocity in the anterior chain, in the hip flexor region. Obviously, we're in a different shape than what we would be Olympic lifting, right? The slam ball is nice because we go from, we're standing on the ground, we go from extension into flexion on the ground. It's a nice transference movement. The GHD sit-up, obviously a little bit different, but really lets us get big hip extension on the front of the hip and rapid, powerful closure of the hip into hip flexion. As with anything like with the GHD sit-ups, if these are new to you, you need to be super mindful of the volume. Be on the excursion that we're taking the trunk and the midline musculature, and how many reps that athletes can easily overcook their volume and how much capacity they're trained to be able to do. People can wind up fairly sore from those very quickly. So If you're new to GHD sit-ups, go super easy on them. Start with 3 sets of 10 to half range of motion. And then as you're progressing on that, as you tolerate that volume well, you can start to go 3/4 range of motion and then eventually going all the way down to the floor. But start with a half range of motion on the GHD sit-ups, which would just be laying yourself to parallel and then snapping yourself back upright. Laying yourself to parallel and then snapping yourself back upright again. So those are a couple really good accessory drills. 2 Olympic lifting technique drills, the snatch balance and the drop snatch, to really work on turning the corner, opening your hip, but then also rapidly closing the hip and getting under the bar. And then 2 accessory drills, the slam ball and the GHD sit-up, as ways to continue training rapid, powerful closure of the hip. The last one that I'll add in is really high box jumps. And while it doesn't train like any loaded hip flexion, it's like body weight, but that having to rapidly extend your hip and then tuck your knees to your chest and create that quick hip flexion component to be able to land on the box, that can also help be a nice skill transference exercise from a power production and a speed aspect to helping athletes be quicker under the bar. So having them prime their Olympic lifts with a couple of high box jumps where the emphasis is open your hip and then close your hip when you land on the box can help to transfer over and help an athlete get under the bar faster. So touch points in summary again, jump hard, not high. Don't find yourself up there in the universe waiting for your feet to hit the ground before you can pull yourself under the bar again. And then when it comes to training technique, use drop snatches and snatch balances to get better at being quicker under the bar. And then skill transfer exercises using GHD sit-ups, slam balls, or high box jumps as a way to train speed and power of hip flexion. Powerful hip flexion is what we talked about today. Thank you guys for tuning in on Instagram, on Facebook, and thank you guys so much for downloading this podcast as you typically do. It's becoming really cool when we can travel to new sites and new locations and we can say, hey, how many people in here listen to the podcast? And the whole room raises their hand up. It's really, really sweet to see so many of you so engaged and following along with the content. So we thank you very much. To anyone tuning in that's going to be hanging with me in New York, I can't wait to hang out with you this weekend and see you very shortly. I'll catch my flight this afternoon. And to any of you that are going to be taking a course this weekend or next weekend or in the weekends coming, get ready for an experience that will surely last a long time with you. Bring your workout clothes because Saturday night you're going to need them after the class finishes up. You're going to be getting a sweat on. You're going to be getting your fitness on as we continue to lead from the front, from the fitness first aspect. So thank you guys so much. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we will see you guys in New York later. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.